Lifelong fulfillment, vision in action. You left. Lifelong fulfillment, vision in action. Live.
Good morning. Welcome to another edition of Vision in Action Live. I'm Jim Boswell. I'm your host and a coach for lifelong fulfillment in the process of personal development. I'm the author of Lifelong Fulfillment, Take Charge of Your Life, its companion website, and this podcast. And on this podcast, we focus on expert knowledge and solutions that contribute to individual personal development. These are the capabilities that allow you to construct and pursue the complete vision of your best life. So we bring you the experts in every conceivable discipline to help inform your thinking about your own journey toward lifelong fulfillment. So again, welcome this morning. Today we visit with Leroy Slonzi. He's a school principal, a special ed and classroom teacher, and the author of Emotional Schools, The Looming Mental Health Crisis and Pathway Through It, and also another book called A New Leadership Paradigm. Welcome, Mr. Slonzi. We're really happy to have you on Vision in Action Live today.
Well, thanks for having me, Jim. I'm excited to be here with you this morning, my friend.
Well, good. You're probably one of the first guests we've had in the education space, and I think you have a fairly interesting message and maybe somewhat unique. So you've written some books, and it seems like you've identified some common issues in education and maybe some ideas about how to address those. So maybe without further ado, let's let you acquaint us with what you're encountering and what you think is going on.
Well, I think, a lot of people want to use as COVID as the benchmark for, the decline in education, whether it be public education, private education, charter schools. But it started before that. It started with the onset of technology. It started in combination with financial difficulties for families, in the sense that both parents were going back to work, having to work to just make ends meet. And then of course we live in this fear-based world with the, inclusion of social media and technology. Parents are more and more afraid to just let their kids go play outside in the cul-de-sac or out in the neighborhood, thinking they might get kidnapped because of something they've seen on social media. So there was a culmination about, I would say 10, 15 years ago, where there was a shift in our culture where, and I think, to my generation and in yours as well, where we were drinking out of garden hoses, our parents would send us outside and we wouldn't see them until dinner time. And, we're out there living life, dealing with trials and tribulations of wiping out on our bikes or climbing a tree or, playing a game of football in the street, whatever it may be. We had that. And then, there was some trust and some faith. And I think around 10, 15 years ago, I started to see this shift in schools where, kids were definitely starting to struggle with just focusing in class. And a lot of it was due to sleep deprivation, because that's when video games really started to take off. And then, with social media and them getting alerts and likes and whatnot from whatever, app they were on. And it just started to culminate. And then with that, because there was a decline in that free play and the decline in a central parental figure at home, kids just gradually became less able to cope in school. And I think now we get to the point where now, and I'll use Canada as an example, and it's going to be different than the States because we have free healthcare here. But our hospital beds in Canada, from children all the way up to adult, 50% of our hospital beds are for mental health, people struggling with their mental health, right? Oh. And yeah, and I imagine in the States that's probably not happening because it's probably not covered in health insurance and all that down there. But if you were covered with universal health care in the United States, I bet you would see an increase in mental health issues in your hospitals as well. And I think what's happening is because there's been a decline in free play. There's been an infusion of social media, and because the nuclear family is not what it used to be, and I understand it. It never will be, because both parents have the right to work, and mom and dad should have the right to chase their careers and to kind of share that responsibility. But what's happened is there's just been this culmination of things that have led our kids to be in a place where they're struggling with just the smallest things. You watch a kid now, if I watch a kid out in the playground scrape his knee, it's like they've been shot, and they've never encountered any kind of physical pain in their life. Whereas, we're riding around on the bikes with blood dripping down our knee back in the day, and having to cope with that. And, or having to figure if our chain fell off our bike, say we'd have to sit there with our buddies, turn our bike upside down, try to get the chain back on the bike.
Right.
You know how that goes. Kids aren't experiencing those trials, those conflicts with each other, with nature, with machines. And because of that, they don't have the abilities that they used to. And so there's this struggle in schools where, we're dealing with kids who are just emotionally unable to cope with doing work, and I don't want to paint everybody the same brush, because 50-60% of the kids can't. There's things going on there. But as the number increases of kids unable to cope with school stressors, that affects classrooms, and which then affects the kids that can cope, right? So that's where we're at. And it kind of, like I said, started 15 years ago, and it's migrated to the point where now we're on the cusp of things going sideways, right? And it's important. It's an important issue.
Yeah. So does that responsibility that hadn't been fulfilled now fall on the school? And how does a school do what would normally have been, self-initiated and combined with parenting? I'm not sure I understand.
Yeah, so this is the great debate that's going on right now. There's a real blame game and a finger pointing situation going on right now, right? And the hard part is that teachers are really frustrated, because they expect kids to show up with manners. They expect kids to show up being ready to learn, with school supplies, with an eagerness and whatnot. And parents are so busy, and because they're working two jobs, or they're both working, and they're not spending as much time with their kids, they're pointing at the school saying, well, I need you to pick up the slack. And at the end of the day, the schools need to pick up the slack. Unfortunately, we're no longer these people where kids show up and we teach them about the Roman Empire, or what, just diving into, and we do, but unfortunately laced in that is having to teach kids basic manners, teaching them how to have some work ethic, teaching them to understand emotional struggle, and which came from the family, and it's just not happening, right? And so that's why I wrote my book. I also have I do a lot of workshops, and I work with schools. I have a framework. It's called the Emotional Schools Framework, where I help schools develop an emotional intelligence culture in their schools that helps kids develop their emotional intelligence, and the adults and the leaders, and it embeds, so it's all just becomes a natural part of what happens in the school, and it's not added on to a teacher. It is at the start. There's some direct teaching that needs to happen, but
Right.
it's all enveloped into one, and it allows teachers to get to let's teach about the water table. Let's teach about sedimentary rocks. Let's dive into phonics and all of that stuff, right? So it can be done, and and I'm doing it. It's just a matter of getting to a place where school leaders and school districts and provincial and state governments are understanding that it has to happen. And if they don't, we're just going to see this constant decline in literacy and numeracy rates, which ultimately affects our workforce and our population in terms of our growth and all of that stuff, right? It's all connected to kids. You hear people not wanting to invest in education. It's like, you're crazy, because if you don't, that's going to kill your economy in 5 years, 10 years, if you keep spitting out kids who can't read and write.
Right. So when you take your program and work with a school district, have you had some successes, or and how long's that been going on for you?
A lot. Well, I used to do a different program, and I've migrated away from it. into one that I've developed on my own based on my book and my own experience. Because I've been a principal for 25 years. So I've incorporated this program into my own schools, and I'm seeing tremendous effects, because what it is there's a shared responsibility from the top of the chain, which is, the principal of the school, and then, even my director of education who's above me, right down to bus drivers, where we're all on the same page in terms of how we interact with kids and their social emotional well-being, so that they can be the best they can be in a classroom, right? And I'm at the current school I'm at right now. I've seen attendance was an issue after COVID. I'm seeing a decrease in attendance. I'm seeing literacy and numeracy rates increase. I'm seeing behavior decrease. And it's all because of the system, that this emotional schools framework, the system that we run. It's embedded into our culture, and everyone wraps around, every kid and each other. And we have this capacity in our building that is doing wonders for kids, and it's allowing us to be teachers again. Right. But sometimes people hear social emotional learning and mental health, and they think it's going to be airy fairy and I don't have time. And really they do, because everybody needs it.
Right. So is that controversial with the parental influence, in that you're setting some expectations, and how do you arrive at those? Are they socially commonsensical and, well held by the town that you operate in, the school system and so forth? How do you do that without, tripping over the parents, so to speak?
Well, it's easy. It's our curriculum is set up for it. So the emotional schools framework is based on science. So the first thing that we do, starting with kindergarten kids, and next year I'm hoping to start with 3-year-olds as well, is we teach kids about the brain and how the brain works, and which is science. And when they go home and they talk to their parents about their amygdala and their prefrontal cortex and how it controls how their emotions, and I'm being serious, right? And they can go home and they can have those conversations. Parents are curious, and I rarely, because now I've ran this program, I've run it in a high school, 2 elementary schools. I have not honestly encountered one parent who's been upset at all, because as soon as they come in, I ask them, I said, do you know what your polyvagal nerve is? Do you know how it's connected to your amygdala and your prefrontal cortex, and it affects how you respond to emotions? And they're like, no. I'm like, well, ask your 5-year-old. They will tell you. And that's the foundation of the program. It's based on science, right? And so when we can teach kids to understand their ego, and we can teach adults to understand how ego works, that's where it all stems. See, back in the day, we naturally had to understand our ego, because if we had an overactive ego and we were cocky, somebody was punching us in the mouth, right? Like you're somebody back in the day, or if you were, you know what I mean? And so you had checks and balances. Nowadays, everyone tries to approach kids from this, let's be positive. Everything's got to be rainbows and sunshines, which is another part of the emotional schools framework, is understanding that yet you're still allowed to use some of those negative emotions to help raise kids, right? It's just a matter of when and how you use them. So what we do is we try to circumvent, helicopter parents and lawnmower parents, and this whole kids need participation ribbons for everything, by getting to it through science. And we start, like I said, we start with 5-year-old kids. And I have a little guy in grade 1, and I see him probably 3 or 4 times a day, because I don't have a principal's office. I work out of a space called a calming space, which supplements, it supplements the learning assistance department. It supplements the special ed department. It supplements classroom teachers. So I deal with kids' behavior, because we approach behavior from an educational standpoint. So I had a little guy show up he shows up all the time, because he's in grade 1. When he gets mad, he kicks or hits, or he throws a chair. And he comes into my office and he goes, it's so hard. And I said, what's hard? He goes, I just do the wrong thing. It's so hard, and I forget to breathe. And I'm like, you do remember why we're breathing though, right? And he's like, we breathe so I can think. And this is a kid who's 6. And,
Right.
there's not an adult, and I'm sure you've done it yesterday, where you've had to take a deep breath before you wanted to honk your horn at somebody, or, or whatnot, right? We all do it. And so
Certainly.
that's the power in it. When you have kids that young, able to understand that if they can make sure that their amygdala is not taken over for their prefrontal cortex, and they can stay calm, they're more than likely going to make the right decision and can persevere in school. Does
Right.
that make sense?
Yes, no, it certainly does. Yeah.
Hmm.
So where did the source material come from for this initiative? Are you the author? Who did you look for to, fill in the blanks and so forth?
Well, for me, there's been some really influential, I guess, authors throughout my
Mhm.
time. I've been in education for 25 years. So for me, leadership and being kind and doing the right thing and having good character and working hard probably started with my dad. He's an Italian immigrant. And, he was bragging the other day, 70 something now, and he was bragging how in 36 and a half years, I never took a sick day. Right. So that's what I grew up with. Right. And so,
Right.
but I also was very kind and I cared about people. I was always empathetic. And so when I came into teaching, I was this cross between my father and this kind person. And so I naturally had relationships with kids. I naturally fell into this stuff. But along the way, I started reading books, by Deepak Chopra. I read the Tao of Pooh at one point, which is all about simplicity. And I'm not, or just so you know, and I know no disrespect, I'm not religious. I'm an atheist. I just believe in doing right. And
Right.
and then as the time went on, I started reading books by Barbara Coloroso. She's just an amazing person who really pushes that kids learn through experience. If it's cold outside and they fight you not wearing a jacket, we'll let them go outside without a jacket, because they'll figure out in a hell of a hurry that they need a jacket on. And she's from like the early 1980s. And then along came Brene Brown, and then came Gordon Neufeld. And so all of their work around being vulnerable and ego and your mind, and then I stumbled across, because I really wanted to get into the science, I stumbled across Stephen Porges, who's the guru of the polyvagal theory, and it all just kind of took everything I was already doing and brought it all together. And then of course the free and the structured play part, which I think is the biggest reason why we're seeing a lack in kids' abilities, is because they don't play as much. There's not as enough free play where they're developing communication skills, critical
Mhm.
thinking skills, creative skills, communication skills, because they're doing this, right? Or they're
Right.
on their phones. And so it all kind of just culminated in, and so my book, The Emotional Schools, is, it's more of a, I guess, a thesis in a way. You can
Right.
consider it my second thesis, where I wrote about my experience in the school system. So lots of understanding from being in the trenches, plus you know scholars and people who know this stuff, right? And then I took it and I turned it into a program. I took everything and I turned it into a program that can tie into elementary, middle, and secondary schools, and be uniquely tailored to each level, perfectly, because I've been a principal in elementary, principal in middle, principal in secondary school. I've been a special ed teacher, been a classroom teacher. My specialty is at-risk kids and behavior. So my experience plus all this, and being a principal, I've been able to shape and mold schools the way they need to be shaped for the most success in terms of literacy, numeracy, and social emotional well-being.
Right. So my guess is you're thinking that this needs implementation in a lot more than just the schools that you work with. And so do you take it out there? Are you a contract program
Yeah.
kind of offering? And how do you how do you identify that you have this working real solution that other people can capitalize on?
Well, the biggest thing is I'm in the trenches. I'm not just, and this is
This is
probably the
probably the
hardest.
hardest.
Probably the hardest part is, when I look at people like Brene Brown and Mel Robbins and Gordon Neufeld and a lot of these people, they may, a lot of them have never been a teacher. They've never had
Right.
to sit in front of a 14 6-year-olds and try to keep their attention, right? And so that's the difference between me and them, is the information that they provide around the brain and emotions. I've lived it. I'm still living it. I'm working it, and we're seeing a great deal of success. And so that's the number one thing for me in terms of people believing in the program I do, because I have the data to support it based on real life
Right.
school-based situations, right? And so, I have a website. Of course, I've written some books, and then, I do a workshop, and then it's word of mouth. And um, yeah, then I have schools, bringing me in, and I train whole schools, whether it's elementary, middle, or secondary schools, and I get them on board. And, the nice part about what I do is, a lot of times when teachers go do professional development, it's the bane of their existence, because it's stuff they don't want to hear anymore. It doesn't really impact them.
Hmm.
Or they don't have the time because it adds on to their already busy day. What I present is a culture shift. It's there's some front loading in terms of teaching around the science behind emotions, but then
Right.
there's visual common language, there's visual competencies, visual emotional intelligence that's there, right? Like I said, right from the bus driver to the cook to the custodian to the paraprofessional to the teacher to the principal, and everybody just uses the same language, and everybody understands their own ego. That's one of the biggest things in these workshops, is I have to get teachers to check their egos at the door, and to really identify where their emotional intelligence is at. And once they understand their own
Hmm.
emotional well-being, then it allows them to go, holy crap, if I can get a grasp, my kids can too. And when they see a 5-year-old talking that, and then, like I said, it just snowballs. And I do workshops and whatnot. And again, I'm in the trenches every day, every day.
Right. So does your program address some of the causative factors? The fact that, the digital generation, it comes to the table with, maybe not the same ability to focus as
Yeah,
you or I might have.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. I call them the 60-second generation. That's where we're at.
60 seconds.
45 to 60. I actually jump it down to 45 seconds now, right? They
Yeah,
live in a world of 45-second clips, which, like you said earlier, is what I'm going to do once we're done with this podcast. I will break this down into 45 to minute and a half clips, because I know that's where not just kids, adults' attention span is at now,
right.
right? So I guess your question is, what do you do about it? Well, first thing you have to realize is it's here to stay. Technologies, unless there's an apocalypse, and the
Right.
zombies come and wipe us out, and we go back to making fire and no electricity and whatnot. We're here to stay. And people are on these bandwagons about banning technology and whatnot, but you're doing our kids a disservice then, because they need to learn how to use the tools, because that's going to be our industry. And it clearly is. Look what's happening with AI, right?
Right.
It's our industry. And so I'm the person who believes in moderation. I'm the person who believes in transitioning kids. I
Mhm.
believe that technology should not be in a child's hands until they've developed intrinsic motivation as children. There's no need for it. There should be no iPads, should be no phones until your kid has passions, whether it be I use my own daughter. Right? She went through a phase where, because we went to the public swimming pool all the time, she watched the Little Mermaid. I had to buy her a mermaid tail. Next thing you know, we're in the swimming. She's wearing the mermaid tail in the bathtub. Then she's wearing it in the swimming pool, and then she's one of the best butterfly swimmers in the entire province. And she hadn't, no video games, no nothing. So my kids just naturally developed that intrinsic motivation, understood passion, understood creativity. And then that's when you start incorporating. Yeah, it's like, here's some technology, and then you monitor it, and you make sure you parent on it. Nowadays, parents, though, they're tired, they're exhausted, throw them an iPad, go watch some YouTube videos. I watch parents with kids, their kids are colicky, and they've got them up here on their chest, and they've got one of those little holders, and I've watched parents turn the kid around in their thing and put a phone in front of their face and let them watch a video, instead of just co-regulating and soothing them. That's where we're at, right? And that's the problem with technology, is when people use it as a crutch rather than a tool. And so my message is you use it as a tool, but you don't use it until your kids know how to develop intrinsic motivation. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no. And I think there's, to the word trust is probably overused, but to learn what to trust and perhaps what to be skeptical about.
Mhm.
Because I find that as a technology user is that, there's an innate sense, if you've been doing it for a while and have learned it, that there's certain things you can trust and certain other things you might want to hold off on.
Yeah, 100%. And this is the problem with social media and whatnot, is there's so many mixed messages that are coming out for parents, and they don't know where to go, how to go, what to do. And at the end of the day, I think, I love the premise of your podcast. And I find, when you said I was the first educator, I was actually a little bit surprised, because education is the foundation for developing emotional intelligence, right? Because it's not happening at home. And we're the ones who are going to make sure that our kids grow up to be adults who are stable, have good character,
Right.
do the right thing. And and you see, and I don't want to pick on the United States, but if you look at the United States and their education system, that's ranked 43rd in the world, and they're at 60% of your population is reading at a grade 6 level, you see why there's such diversity between people. And it's because they don't have the ability to understand what's happening emotionally for them as adults. And so it's just this blame, it's your fault, it's and that's the thing. The more educated your population is in terms of not just reading, writing, and arithmetic, but ego and the science of emotions, the better chance that they're going to be able to work with people, to have an
Mhm.
open mind, to have great collaboration, to invent and be creative. And and that surprises me, that and I hope maybe you'll bring some more of us on your show just to talk about that a
Oh,
little bit
I'm
more.
eager to do it without a doubt.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So does this carry through into the collegiate effort also, do you think? Or do you
uh,
think this is foundational in the age brackets that you address?
Well, what's interesting? I think once you get to college, because I know this now because my son is in his first year of college,
Oh, great.
and he's in the kinesiology program. So within kinesiology, there's a lot of sciences, and so he's got to take a psych course because he's got to understand the mental side of sport. And so I'm watching him, and I are having unbelievable conversations. And he's, because I've had these posters and competency stuff in my house, and he's fought back, and I coached him basketball for years, and now he's kind of like, Dad, I this is incredible. And he was always one of those kids who wanted to be mentally tough because he was a stud basketball player, and he always wanted to have an edge over someone, not just
Mhm.
with dribbling or shooting, but psychologically. The problem with colleges is if you don't stream into an area where they talk psych or they talk sociology, and you just say you go into you're going to be an English major or a history major. I wished, and it's not just, colleges. And this is what my plight is this stuff needs to be infused into science, math, English. So whenever there's an opportunity, if a kid is struggling with testing, like guy in by 12, and he's like, oh my God, I need a 96 to get into Harvard, and I got a 93. That's a great opportunity to talk about how your brain is functioning, and saying, listen, this is what you're feeling. This is why you're feeling it. But if you do take some deep breaths and you soothe your polyvagal nerve, you'll be able to settle, and your brain will work better for this test. And so it's everywhere. And if you watch what's going on in terms, you walk into a bookstore and you see, go to the self-help section, it's $1 billion business, and for adults, right?
Oh, yeah.
So I guess the point I'm trying to make is it's not where it needs to be, but that is my goal, is that I can keep pushing this enough that I'll get into more and more schools, and it'll go viral, so to speak.
Well, I think your message is so appropriate. I do hope it does go viral, right? Um, it seems to me that we're also at a point of conflict with the commercial world too, because they're the ones, like news, everything gets generated, even one subject will have multiple reporters and it's immediate, it's electronic, it's they get paid for moving our emotions, either negative or positive, right? Neutral doesn't really buy them anything. And so it seems like we're in a conflict between the environment we live in and the things that you're doing that have a more moderate approach, that tend to say, let's not go overboard about this or underemphasize that. But I think we've got a really conflicted environment that we're trying to do this in. And that a kid unknowingly might point to, well, but here, right over here is a problem, right? And I can't do anything about it. And I get frustrated and I get scared. Those sorts of things. Do you make recommendations about those kinds of things, Leroy?
I do, and that the pendulum or the thing with the balls, one comes and clicks and it clicks, or
Oh yeah,
you use the pendulum. It
right,
seems like we're living in a world where it's like click, this is over here, click, it's over here, and then you got all this stuff in the middle.
right.
And at the end of the day, it's really hard because you hear about far right people, far left people, and then you have people in the middle, and really it boils down to your own ego, and it boils down to just doing the right thing. And I think that's the biggest thing. If you could just melt everything down and you put people into a room, and if they saw an infant all by itself abandoned, I would say 99% of people would go, I need to go pick that kid up. The right thing to do is to pick that baby up, take care of that baby, make sure it's going to be okay. That's at a primal level, right? You take that, and we need more people to get into a place where when they see something and they know in their stomachs, people know in their stomachs what the right thing to do is, but they're being, like you said, they're being influenced so much that they're making a choice to not do the right thing because of a perspective or an influence, and wanting to, it's peer pressure. It's truly, I feel like society's turned into an old school high school where you have this click, that click, this click, and I need to be in the cool group, or I need to be in this group, or I need to be on the, you know what I mean? And the goal is to always get people to do the right thing regardless of what their views are. And if you do the right thing, then good things will happen. And you can't do the right thing though if you're not in a state where your ego is balanced. If you have an overactive ego or an underactive ego, you're going to be more narcissistic, egotistical, all those things. If you have an underactive ego, you're going to have self-esteem issues. You're not going to think you're worthy. And that's the key, is to just know who you truly are. And I think that's, you nailed it. People don't know who they are anymore, even though in their guts, they know what the right thing to do is, and I could dive into we're in the middle of an election here in Canada, and you watch politicians, because it's at the forefront because of what happened in the United States and what's happening. It's really impacting on what we're doing up here in terms of how we're going to vote and what we're doing. And you watch and you see people wanting to make the right decision based on the right thing, and they're too caught up in a faction, or instead of just truly listening and seeing what's happening, right? And so you see it on a political level, which then boils into people's homes, which then trickles down to their kids. And at the end of the day, just people need to trust their gut instinct instead of the noise, and that's the message I try to send to people. It's just very simply, when I deal with parents who might get upset over the smallest thing, I'm like, well, what does your gut say? I had a parent one time, their kid was just tormenting another kid, and he's just, and this poor guy who was tormenting other kids, he has ADHD, and it's hard for him. So he's constantly chasing dopamine. So he's always pestering. Well, one day a kid turned around and plopped him. And this parent, I called the parent, and then the other kid hit him back, turned into a bit of a fight. And I'm like, and I was explaining what's going on. And the parent said to me, he goes, so you said you think my kid deserves it or deserved it? And I said, nobody deserves to be hit, but the natural consequence for things is an emotional reaction, right? And I had to explain. I said, and the right thing to do would have been, first thing, hopefully there would have been an adult helping this kid who had ADHD to make sure there's some co-regulation there. But at the end of the day, it's like nobody deserves a physical response, but there is a cause and effect, and it
Mhm.
takes the parents, instead of trying to attack and saying, oh, you think my kid deserves it, stupid schools. I had to get them to the point where I understand, it's like, here's the science, here's emotional reaction. And I even pointed out, I'm like, look how you're getting upset with me right now when I'm giving you information, and you're putting words in my mouth, and I didn't say your kid deserved
Right.
it. I said, but the natural consequence of this is there's going to be an emotional reaction from this kid, or if the kid didn't hit him back, the kid would have went home and complained, and then I would have been calling him saying, another parent's calling your kid a bully, right? And so it could go either way, and at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. It's just everybody knows what's right for the most part, you know.
Yeah, great. Well, listen, where can people reach you, and refresh us on your website if you would?
Sure, it's emotionalschools.com, and they can reach me at emotionalschools@outlook.com or Leroy Slonzi @gmail.com.
Okay, great.
That
Well,
easy.
listen, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. This is all good news for everybody to be aware of. And I wish you success at continuing. It sounds like you're doing a great job.
Well, I appreciate that, Jim, and keep in touch. If you ever need to have a conversation or have some questions, just let me know. All
I
right.
will do that. Thank you.
All right.
Have a good week, sir.
Yeah, have a good weekend. Take care.
Well, thanks again for attending Vision in Action Live, and I hope you got some insights you can use. Thanks be to Ms. Raylene Weaver. Our future episodes will look at things like emotional quotient and mindfulness in schools. We're going to look at the economic war on workers and the future of work, learning, and development. Our podcasts focus on interviews with subject matter experts and people leading self-directed lives, so that you can see exactly what one can accomplish doing personal development. Check out newsletters, podcasts, and extensive reference materials at lifelongfulfillment.com. And you can find us routinely on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and your favorite podcast channel. There's plenty there for you to look at. And we also distribute through KFRED Internet Radio to other sources of podcasts and radiocasts. I'm Jim Boswell, your host today. And until next time, how are the men in your life doing? Thank you. Have a great week.
Life